Welcome back, guys. So in this video I'm going to show you how to, now that we've done the lamination, glassed on the fins, it's time to do a hot coat, which is a layer of epoxy on top of the lamination coat of the surfboard. For that, to do some preparation, we need to do a tape rail all the way around the board so no drips get underneath the board, which just causes more headaches for sanding later, because if you put a layer of tape around it, it just gives you a nice clean line. So when you do the hot coat on the bottom, you do the same thing. It just makes things really easy. The first board I ever built, I didn't know that. There weren't as many resources out there on board building. I just kind of winged it. It just took me so much more sanding. So let's tape this and then we'll start the hot coating process. I just want to draw attention to this right here. This is where the hard rail meets the soft rail. So this is where it meets more like at a 90, and this is more like a rounded. So on the deck, when I'm doing the hot coat, I'm going to end the tape here so that way the epoxy will drip over this, so I get a nice buildup of epoxy on this. And that's important later so I can get a nice square edge on this latter part where the fins are. So just take that into account when you're taping your rail. This part here, tape around the middle and then end it when you're doing the deck right where it gets kind of, it becomes like the hard rail. Now it's time to mix up some resin. But before we do that, let's prepare all our tools. We'll get our gloves on. We're going to need a brush. The type of brush I like to use is this chip brush. Now, this chip brush are really cheap. I got this guy at Walmart, or I bought a bunch of them at Walmart for a couple bucks. Try to get them as wide as possible, because that way you're going to be coating a lot of the surface area of the board at once. You're going to be covering it really quickly. You don't do like a 2-inch, that's going to take you forever. Your resin might even start getting gummy, and you're not going to get really great results because you can get some brush strokes if it starts setting before you get the board fully hot coated and covered. So that's just a chip brush, and the reason why these are so good is because they're really soft, so they don't leave a lot of brush marks. For painting, these aren't actually all that great. But for doing this, these are really great. And they're cheap. But before we do that, these have bristles that will pull out because of the inferior quality, I guess. These things are just cheaply made. So we take a little tape, and we take our brush, and we jam it into the tape just to pull out any bristles. So do that a couple times. Work at it, make sure that there's no loose bristles, because as you're working on the board when you're hot coating, if any bristles come off, then you gotta play with it, and you gotta mess around. Just a pain in the ass. So, okay, so enough about the brush. We're gonna mix up resin now, just like we did for the lamination. I won't bother to show that. Real easy. Follow manufacturer's instruction, use a scale. Alright, so I grabbed my logbook, and for the bottom I used a total of 600 grams of resin. And the reason why I'm using the bottom as a reference is because the deck I actually used 825 or 850 grams of total mixed resin, but that had 2 layers of cloth. So that's not going to be the most accurate. I'm going to go with probably the 600 grams that I used for the bottom, and I'm going to take about 2/3 of it. So I'm going to try about 400 grams of total mixed resin for the deck. If I need more, I'll mix up some more. I'll know pretty quick if I have enough or if I don't have enough, but I'll try about 400 grams. Alright, let's mix up some resin. And before I mix up the resin, let's just talk a little bit about technique. for when we're doing the hot coat. What we want to do is we want to fill the weave of the lamination layer, and what this will do is it'll make it watertight, because this board isn't watertight right now, and it'll also it'll make it significantly stronger. So, technique. What we're going to do is we're going to mix up our resin and we're going to dump it all out. And then we're going to push with the brush up and down the board. Pushing I find is a little easier. It's kind of plowing the resin. Or you could do this. You could go with the brush like that. But it's a little slower, but it does work. We're going to spread out the resin as much as we can on the board. Then we're going to go and we're going to try to hit the rails with it all the way around. Once we hit the rails, we're going to go back and forth. So we're going to do cross strokes against the board, like this, to level out all the resin. We'll go by it maybe once, maybe twice. And then we're going to walk all the way around the board, and then we're going to go along the edge. We're going to do the rail to catch any drips. And then we might go back, we'll evaluate at that point, and just check the board, and then maybe do the rail again to catch any more drips. And then we're going to leave it alone. If you start screwing with it too much and you're not happy with it, or you think it's not even, once the resin, after a few minutes of playing with it, it's going to start thickening, and it's going to give you more headaches than it's worth trying to fix it. So spread it out evenly, leave it alone. Don't come into the room when it's setting, because it's going to make dust blow around. Don't do it when there's wind. Don't do it when there's like dust in the air. Don't leave your door open. You want to do this with the least amount of air movement as possible. Don't let the sun shine into your garage or your shed or whatever you're making, because the sun will heat up surfaces and it'll cause dust to fly up in the air. It'll just give you headaches later. You're going to get a bad job. The other thing I learned, for those of you who are in cold weather climates and trying to build boards, and the temperature is still cold in the garage, you gotta make sure that it's of a certain temperature, because the resin will not spread around. You want to be at least 15 degrees Celsius, as I mentioned before. It's especially important for the hot coat. The lamination, you can get away with cooler temperatures. The hot coat and the gloss coats, because we're spreading just the resin and we're going for a smooth surface, really important to have a good temperature. And the mistake I made one time was I put a heater very close to the board to try to heat up the garage. And while it heated up the garage, I kept the heater, I would say, about here, and the board was here. The heat caused the resin to bubble. So this part of the board was awesome. This part of the board wasn't. This part of the board had little bubbles because it heated up. I was using EPS foam at the time. XPS foam is probably going to be not as much of an issue. Try to avoid it regardless. It'll cause it to off gas, and little bubbles formed all over the surface of the board. So I had to sand that all out, and then I had to redo the coat. So anyways, that was a mistake I learned, trial and error, so I know not to do it now. So if you're going to heat the room, keep the heater further away from your board, and then probably keep it on low heat once you get the room up to a certain temperature, just to maintain the temperature. Try not to blast it with heat, thinking that it'll cause this to cure faster or the resin to smooth out better. It's not going to work like that. Okay, let's get to it. Okay, I got my batch of resin mixed up. And we got to remember to add a little extra additive F in this. I don't really have an exact amount, but I added a couple of capfuls to this. That's about the size of the cap I have on this bottle. So I added about 3 capfuls to, I don't know, 400 grams of resin or so. So I'm just going to give this a couple more stirs. I'm going to stick my respirator on, and then I'm going to start hot coating. The other thing I forgot to mention, or I might have mentioned, but I don't remember, but is to, if the smoother you get the surface, if you have any little irregularities, little bumps of, fiberglass and epoxy that kind of just got raised, you want to sand those all down. The smoother the surface that you have, that going into hot coating, the better results you're going to get. You're going to get a much smoother finish. Don't skimp. Don't be lazy. make sure that the board is nice and smooth. Run your gloved hand over the board to check for any weird irregularities, and then sand those out if you need to. Because if you don't, the sanding step next time, you might sand through the epoxy into the weave of the fiberglass if you have any raised bumps. So just be aware of that. Basically, it's like everything. The more prep work you put into something, the better the result. And again, we're going to dump all this resin out onto the board so we have a little more longer time to work with it. Because the pot life, the more that it's in one spot, the quicker it'll catalyze or react and cure or harden up really quickly. Alright, that does about do it. Looks really nice and smooth. I don't see any fish eyes, which is a big plus. That's always my worst fear, is having fish eyes. Okay, let's let this cure now. And before it gets fully cured, we're going to pull the tape. So we're going to come back and check in about 2, 3, 4 maybe hours, depending on your temperature, how long it takes for this to get tacked up and the resin to be set, just like when we did the cut lap. And we'll pull the tape because it'll make it a lot easier. If you let it wait until it fully cures, pulling the tape can be sometimes a little bit problematic. Okay, it's been a few hours, and now when I check it, it's not gooey, it's not stringy, but it's still a little pliable, the epoxy. So now I'm going to pull the tape. This is about the perfect time now to pull the tape. If you have these little spots of tape that just kind of got left behind, just take some masking tape tear off a piece and put it over the section and just slowly remove it. Generally, it'll pull it off like that. That does it for hot coating the deck. The next video will be hot coating the bottom. So thanks for watching, and the next video will be coming very shortly.